Thank you, John, for raising your hand before I even asked the question. So normally this is the, do you hear me and see the screen? And so I think John's beat me to it already, so I appreciate that. So thanks, Chrissy. I think normally I always say we wait for the herd to come in. I don't know, like a Google herd or something. I think we had about 1,100 or so register for today to hear Dr. James' remarks. So be a fun one, I'm sure. Wait here for some people to crowd in. As usual, those of you who have attended these before, usually we'll start about 2 minutes after the hour and be able to make sure Dr. James has plenty of time for the meat and content. So. No snacks, Aaron. I think we've done 24 of these webinars, and Aaron, I think you've attended all 24, so I appreciate that. So one time, maybe the 25th, right? It's like your teenager that asks you the question 18 times in a row, and you say no, and the 19th time is a yes. So maybe the 29th or 30th time, it'll be a mystery as to when we will actually bring snacks. Welcome, welcome for those of you who have just arrived. So now all the people who are super timely are really coming in. We have the early crowd and then the on-time slide in crowd. And then I know we've got a big rush that'll happen usually about 10 minutes after. So. We'll see if the statistics hold again for this webinar. We sort of looked at it. I was telling Dr. James yesterday, sort of in prep for this, it's between like 63 and 66% of the people who register actually attend. And so I was curious about incentives and disincentives. It's like if you pay, do you tend to attend more? But, you know, it's been interesting to me is actually how many people actually do attend that register, even though these are free. But all right, so it's starting to, I don't know if it's slowing down yet, but we're going to wait about another 30 seconds and we're going to get cranked up here. Well, I want to welcome everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. I think we're at about 40% who registered so far. Usually we'll get another 20% in the next 10 minutes or so. So I am Brian Klontz with Charitable Solutions. Very, very happy to have everyone here today, in particular for Dr. James's content. I heard a permutation, I think, of this before, and as soon as I came back after hearing that, I'm like, I'd love to have you deliver the same content, because we get this question all the time, and that is, how do you actually talk to people that have wealth and to encourage them to consider gifts of wealth for their charitable giving? And so what are the science and the sentences which you see here that he'll be going through as well. So those of you who have attended know that I sort of go through this little title page, make sure you can hear us and see the screen. And then I'll go through just a couple pieces about sort of who we are, what we do, which directly tie into this particular topic as well. So the first thing is sort of what we do. So Charitable Solutions is a firm, if I make it another 3 months, will be 20 years. We have now a team of 28 people, just added 2 more in the last couple of weeks. But all that we do is centered around this mission of helping make charitable gifts happen that otherwise wouldn't, primarily through risk management. And so we get very obsessed about that particular area, we always say if you have a good donor with a good asset wanting to do good things, do not say no. There are niche organizations like ours and many others who are fantastic in what they do, but can help that donor achieve their goal and then obviously their eventual impact for your or multiple organizations. And so very quickly, I won't go into this. We do a lot in the emergency assistance fund space. So I have a separate charity I set up about 10 years ago to do that. We now have about 165 staff or so on that side. So primarily doing disaster relief and hardship grants for very large employers and multinational companies. Doing what we're doing today, which is a professional advisor, CE. Obviously, many of you are professional advisors and also not-for-profit gift planning professionals, but do that for board and staff and others. Through various speeches. Dr. James is on that circuit as well in a pretty big way. And then around gift annuities, we do gift annuity risk management. So we have a couple actuaries on staff, do stress testing of pools to hopefully help maximize the residuums while minimizing risk. And most importantly, these projects are to hopefully instill some confidence in these pools, both from at the staff level, but also perhaps more importantly at the board and volunteer level, that we always say if we can develop a model based on the specific organization, and if one comes in and looks like A, you handle it this way. If it comes in and looks like B, you handle it that way. So that there's actually sort of a logical triage to those gifts. And we have a particular specialty if they're really big. And so if they're a very large concentrated gift, can look at as appropriate sort of reinsurance, both design placement, modeling, what level is right level, and so forth. So that's the gift annuity risk side. Jumping bottom left, which is not logical at all, but sort of keeping in the gift annuity vein, we have the National Gift Annuity Foundation. So it is a third-party independent charity that does nothing but gift annuities. Do this in all 50 states, can do it for illiquid gifts as well. But we have about 650 contracts now that have been referred over. About 300 charities or so that we work with, and it's for those charities that don't want to have a gift annuity program for whatever reason. So perhaps they're smaller, or they don't have a gift annuity program in a particular state. You know all the fun ones, so New York and California and so on. Or if it's just for a particular type of asset that otherwise they would not be comfortable receiving. So back to my original point, helping gifts happen that otherwise wouldn't. For those charities otherwise that would say no, don't say no. So if it's a gift annuity, you can refer that over to us or many other similar organizations do this, in particular in the faith-based space. But for whatever reason, if we might be a good fit, that can be referred over. We take on the liability, we take the asset, manage that gift annuity until the final death, obviously, of the first or second annuitant. And then 100% of the residuum then is granted back to the charity or charities that the donor wished to give to in the first place. So very much all we're about is sort of handling the illiquid risk management admin, and then once liquid, then it's being granted out. On the appraisal side, to sort of jump over here, our quick little tagline is, if you can give it to charities, we can appraise it. We were stumped on that about 2 weeks ago. A CPA called in Orlando asking about a horse. Don't do horses, but most everything else. So you can sort of see that list. So we have 2 appraisers just doing business interests now. I do cryptocurrency and life insurance and so forth. We have a specialist just in art and collectibles, one for precious metals. And I've mentioned a couple times, one of our tangible property appraisers did an appraisal for a $250,000 gift of bourbon to a South Carolina charity. Don't put it in the chat because I've heard it 900 times, can they be a taste tester? No, you can't be a taste tester. But these are the types of assets, which Dr. James will talk about, sort of way beyond cash that people actually own that they might otherwise wish to give to charity. So that's the sort of qualified appraisal piece. We only do charitable appraisals. So 8283s, we get it. So it's all we're doing is sort of that space now too. And the final piece, which is really what we're going to be talking about more today, is non-cash asset risk management. So in 2003, when I created Charitable Solutions, also created a national donor advised fund that does nothing but receiving illiquid or complex gifts that other charities have otherwise declined. Same thing, we're on the chain of title, we're doing everything from a management and risk management perspective. And then once sold, then we are actually able to make a grant of those net proceeds 30 days after the sale to one or multiple charities. About 98% of what we do would be life income or major gifts, lifetime gifts. And the other 2-3% would be a couple of state gifts, but primarily around the CRT, life income side as well, or CGAs. So you can sort of see that too. Next thing I'll talk about very briefly is what the numbers were, at least for last year. Big nugget here, sort of teeing up Dr. James' talk here in a pretty big way, and that is in 2020, we felt we had the best year ever, and we were never going to have a better year. So we received in 2020 100 donations, and there's about $460 million in assets. So 100 donations otherwise that had been declined by charities that were illiquid or complex gifts. We were able to receive, capture, they get all their deductions, all the good stuff. And then that was then, of course, granted back to the charities, as I mentioned before. 2021, we went from 100 of those donations to 261 of those donations. So it wasn't like, oh, it grew by 5%. We would have been happy with 5%. This is growing parabolically. So since 2014, we've grown 100% a year, which is a statistically fun way of saying we doubled every single year since 2014. So this is just massive, massive growth in this particular space. You can see the sort of deconstruction of this. So 261 broken out, real estate, 42 million, business interest, just under 1.1 billion of that. Should have these tabbed over, I know. 49 C Corp, S Corp, LLCs. This is a little bit funky in that a number of these LLCs, about 30, are actually elected to be S Corps. So it's kind of odd that it's about 50-50-50 if you go through these three different types, and then you can sort of see the overall amount there. Cryptocurrency, everybody wants to talk about it nonstop, was about probably 80 to 90% of all of our referrals, less than 2% of all of our gifts. So we can do them. They tend to be pretty large, but a lot of activity there. A real key point of the 261 that we completed, that took about 18 to 1900 referrals. So we get about 8 to 10 referrals a day on average from charities who are otherwise declining the gift because of the complexity, the timing, don't have the capacity, for whatever reason. 8 to 10 referrals a day to complete one a day. So there are a lot of rabbits being chased that just don't work out, and that's okay. So that's it. So before I jump over, we're going to have Dr. James share his screen in a second, but these are all of our past webinars. We started this series, as you can see, sort of at the front end of COVID. A lot of people asked about questions about, are they traveling, education? Like, well, we'll just do some webinars, and this has sort of caught on. So I hope they're very helpful to you. They've always been free. This is our 24th. The key point, and there was a question I know already, we don't tend to send out slides after. However, you will get a free recording of this, and on the Charitable Solutions website, right up here, all of these past webinars are available, all free, including a Q&A from the speaker. So any of the questions, here's a big housekeeping note, any questions you have, please put that in the Q&A. I can drag it out of chat. It's kind of a pain. So it's just much easier to scrape it out of the Q&A. Then what we will do is consolidate those sort of thematically and then send those over to Dr. James to be able to reply to you. So we'll be able to have that then on the site available to you. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing. I know Dr. James will start sharing, and as he's doing that, I just want to make an introduction. So this is going to sound really snarky, but I'll say it anyway. If you've done any kind of charitable planning in the last year, if you've not read any of his 150 plus publications, books, seminars, webinars, you've been living under a rock. I said it. And you need to get out more. And so won't go a lot into his background other than to say what I really, really respect is the fact that for 10 years prior to entering academia, he was a plan giving director of gift planning, and then was a president of a university. And what I love, and I've told him this very directly too, is that now once he's gone into academia, both with the PhD, JD, et cetera, having those backgrounds, that he makes his research tangible, practical, and actionable, unlike other people in academia from time to time. So with that, I will turn this over to Dr. James. So appreciate your being with us here. And again, any questions, just put those in the Q&A, and I'll do my best of answering those as we go, and anything else I'll queue up to him. So thank you.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Brian. So I'm looking forward to being able to share some ideas on how to have wealth conversations that inspire major gifts of assets. But, you know, I'm a statistics guy. So, Brian, I have to say I'm used to people talking about having growth that is exponential. I love the reference to your growth being parabolic. I will say, however, that this is what a parabola looks like. So I guess you've been spending too much time in the cryptocurrency space to think of growth that comes up and then crashes down horribly. So hopefully that's not describing what your experience is going to be in the future there. But we're going to be talking about an area of of long-term growth. We're going to be talking about the major gifts of assets, and going to try to get really practical on what words and phrases do we use. What do we actually say? Now, for some of you that have been following some of the things that I've been sharing recently, and by the way, if you have interest in any of this stuff, I do share all my stuff for free. Easiest way is if you just connect with me on LinkedIn. I will send you every book I've ever written in digital form, and all my slide sets, all my videos, all that sort of stuff I do share for free. But I like to talk about this idea that the one big thing in fundraising, big picture, is to advance the donor's hero story. So that's the right story, but I want to suggest that for really large gifts, we actually need one more element in the story. We need to have the right setting. So is this the land of wealth sharing? That's really the setting question. Now, if you think of it in terms of story, in story, setting matters. Setting creates expectations. It defines appropriate behaviors. You know, are we in a fantasy realm? Then we're open to fantasy events. Are we in the Old West? Then we expect Old West things. The story should match the setting. Look, a John Grisham legal thriller is not going to include zombies. A Zane Grey Western won't have a magical elf. What does this have to do with fundraising? Well, in fundraising, setting matters too. You see, typical gifts come from disposable income. They're in the category of regular, daily, or weekly expenditures. This is a small reference point. This creates small comparisons and small gifts. You see, a story in that setting will never lead to a very large gift. A major gift doesn't fit that setting. It's a bit like a space alien landing in a Danielle Steele romance. Major gifts are different. Of course, they're larger, but they're also different in type. These principal or major gifts are not gifts from disposable income. Major gifts are gifts of wealth. So to advance that large gift story, we've got to have the right setting. We need to be in the right world. We need to answer the question, is this the land of wealth sharing? So how do we do that? How do we establish that setting? If the major gift story is set in the land of wealth sharing, how can a fundraiser establish that setting? No surprise, it starts by talking about wealth. When we talk about wealth, some of the easiest ways to do that is to speak about it Socratically. That means getting the donor to talk about their wealth. It means getting them to talk about their businesses or investments. So how does this help? Well, first, we see from experiments that just reminding people of their wealth is powerful. This just by itself encourages sharing. Second, these conversations can reveal capacity. They can uncover assets. They can also reveal plans. They can show plans to buy or sell, acquire or retire. These assets and these plans create opportunities. The fundraiser can share stories of what others like the donor have done before. She can provide creative solutions. She can actually deliver real value to the donor. The fundraiser in story actually has an archetype. In the universal hero story, there are other archetypal characters besides the hero. And one of those is the guiding sage. The guiding sage helps the hero. The sage gives advice, planning, and guidance. The sage introduces the hero to friends and allies. The sage provides a magical instrument or weapon. This might be Obi-Wan Kenobi in the original Star Wars, or Morpheus in The Matrix, or Gandalf the Grey in The Hobbit. These guiding sage characters help the hero to complete the journey. The effective fundraiser can do this. She can be the guiding sage for the donor's hero story. Well, in fact, any advisor can do this. She knows wise friends and allies. She knows technical experts. She knows people like Brian Klotz. She knows donors who have made complex gifts before. She also has magical instruments that can help with the journey. She knows about gift instruments and agreements. But of course, not every instrument works for every journey. Not every ally is helpful for every hero. Socratic inquiry, that is asking questions, reveals what fits each hero's specific journey. The guiding sage asks questions in order to help. Large, major, principal gifts are set in the land of wealth sharing. For these large gifts, the guiding sage fundraiser should ask about assets. But it's uncomfortable. These conversations require talking about wealth. Many fundraisers in particular are uncomfortable with this. They aren't wealthy themselves. Often they aren't wealth experts. So the topic can feel a little scary. How can you overcome this? Well, first I would suggest think of the goal as social, not just financial. Look, suppose your job was to build relationships at a Star Trek convention. How would you get ready for this? Well, you might want to learn a little bit about Star Trek. Why? Because it's what the other person cares about. It just makes conversations easier. Wealthy people, they're interested in wealth. Building and managing wealth is a big part of their lives. So you might want to learn a little about the topic. Why? Because it's what the other person cares about. Now, look, I get it. You might think that tax law sounds like Klingon, but you can still learn a little. You don't have to become a leading expert. The point is just to make conversations easier. But the more important point is to have the right destination in mind. And that is the request to share valuable options. Fundraisers can often fear financial conversations. Ooh, what if you say the wrong thing? What if you give bad advice? A conversation can feel like a scary pop quiz. These worries come from an underlying error. They come from having the wrong destination in mind. We want to ask wealth and asset questions. We want to have wealth and asset conversations. We want to spot solutions where some option might be helpful. But the goal is not to quickly give the right answer. The goal is this: to get permission to share options at the next meeting. If you are worried about having these conversations because you'll get some hyper-technical question and you won't know the answer to, that's actually a wonderful result, because that justifies setting up a time for the next meeting. I'd love to speak to some of our experts, answer that question, put together some detailed plans for you to look at if you'd be willing to take a look at some of these options in a couple of weeks. That reduces your stress from feeling like you have to know everything about everything instantly, and it instead uses those technical questions as a justification for the next meeting. And by the way, during that meeting, we got lots of time to get on the phone, call Brian, call other folks, ask about, hey, I've got this weird asset. What should we do with it? What are some of the options with it? So if you have the right destination in mind, it makes the conversation so much more comfortable. All right, so what does this actually sound like? It might sound a little bit like this. You remind me of another donor. He was in a similar situation. I remember he used some creative planning. It avoided taxes and helped him make a big impact. Would you mind if I put together some ideas for you to look at? This phrasing can actually be powerful. Number one, it shows that people like the donor have done things like this before. You remind me of a similar situation. It also leads with value. We're not saying, can I have a meeting in 2 weeks to ask you for money, right? We're saying words like creative planning, avoiding taxes, big impact. It also asks for permission to share more value. Put some ideas together. By the way, just one side note, it also asks in a way where the desired answer is no. Saying no feels psychologically safer and more comfortable because it's usually the less risky status quo response. So we ask it, would you mind if I? We also can introduce an ally. If the fundraiser isn't comfortable presenting a proposal, that's often okay. The Guiding Sage fundraiser can introduce the donor hero to a friend or an ally. This ally helps advance the donor's journey. One fundraiser shares this phrasing. I can't tell you the ins and outs of a CRUT, but I'd be happy to introduce you to someone who can. I've been told that this instrument offers ways to maximize your giving, minimize income taxes, and provide a degree of flexibility in your financial situation. Is this something you'd be interested in hearing about? Others suggest, you mentioned that you're going to pass the business on to your kids. Did you know there are some ways you can do that that will actually save you money on the transaction by being charitable? On my next visit, I'll bring our specialist in that area so we can talk about it in more detail. Notice that in either case, the goal is not to be quick with a solution. The goal is to spot an issue and get the next meeting. Only then does the fundraiser or maybe an ally present the valuable options. This is actually intentional because there's power in delay. You see, the right destination is to get the next meeting. Creating this time delay is important. First, it keeps the initial conversation social. It separates the conversation from any financial ask. It gives time to build creative options. It makes those options feel more valuable. Look, an off-the-cuff answer, it's more easily dismissed, even if it's the right answer. This delay also gives the donor time to think. The donor knows the meeting will show asset gift options. This moves the donor's mindset into the land of wealth sharing. The more time the donor spends in this setting, the more likely a major gift becomes. In story terms, the goal is to create an epic scene. The guiding sage delivers the perfect weapon. The weapon gives the hero confidence to take the journey. A great scene requires some buildup. It requires some anticipation. In practical terms, it requires the next meeting. We can do a bit of a partial reveal. Having expertise can help. As knowledge increases, the ability to spot issues also increases. But actually, expertise can hurt. Instantly giving the whole answer short circuits this process. Delay is actually valuable. If we know the solution, a partial reveal is fine. It can create interest and attraction, but make clear that there is more to the story. If pressed, try to defer. For example, I want to talk with some of my technical folks first. That way you'll get all the best options. But I know there are some attractive possibilities here. Having the right destination changes things. It reduces fundraiser stress. It gives time to consult experts and build solutions. By the way, with this goal, even failures can be valuable. We can fail forward. Think of it this way. Suppose we make an error. We think we spot an issue. We think we see an opportunity, but later we find out there isn't a solution. Maybe they want to give something that's not all that valuable, or there's not really great tax advantages giving a current annuity or something like that. If we get the next meeting, we can still win. We can still present other powerful options to the donor. Now, suppose we do that. Suppose we present all of these options about asset giving and the donor says no. this failed meeting can still lead to great success. We've shared useful options. We've provided value to the donor as a guiding sage. We've established our role in the donor's story. Now, look, the donor may say no. The hero may at first reject the call to adventure. That's okay. That's actually part of the story. But in the hero story and in life, things can change. Setting is a place. For the major gift, that place is the land of wealth sharing. But setting is also a time. The time for wealth sharing might not be today. It might be when an investment or business is about to be sold. It might be at the end of life. It might be when a new project arises at the charity. The road to a major gift is often long. Major donors tend to plan their finances well in advance. But asking about gifts of assets lays the groundwork. It prevents lost opportunities. After a sale, many charitable planning options are lost forever. Having these meetings and having these conversations, even if they appear to fail in the moment, prepares for those future moments. It prepares for moments of perhaps windfall gains when generosity is easiest. It prepares for life events that trigger estate planning. It keeps the donor thinking of their assets as donation relevant. So yeah, maybe we didn't get the gift today, but the donor learned about new options. He saw what others like him have done before. He started a journey in a new land. He spent time in the land of wealth sharing. All right, so let's get started. We know the destination. We know the reasons why, but how do we get there? How do we even get started? What are the precise words and phrases? Well, let's take a look at this when we move to the questions that lead to gifts of assets. All right. So we want the donor to talk about assets. Why? Well, several reasons. Number one, it creates a setting of wealth sharing. Number two, it uncovers capacity for a major gift. Number three, it reveals opportunity for creative solutions. What do I mean by creative solutions? Well, for example, suppose a donor is planning to sell an appreciated asset. Hey, there's solutions for that. Maybe they're not planning to sell appreciated stocks. We've got solutions for that. Maybe they're getting ready to retire. We've got great charitable options for that. Maybe they're taking retirement account distributions. Oh my goodness, stop doing that. We've got great charitable options for that. Maybe they've got a big income spike. They're looking for a big deduction offset. We can do that. Maybe they can't use tax deductions. That's all right. Still lots of charitable planning opportunities. Maybe they have kids who don't want to take over the farm or a vacation home. We've got great planning opportunities for that. Maybe they've got estate tax issues, obviously lots of instruments for that. Maybe they have all their wealth tied up in illiquid assets. We can definitely work with that. The last reason we want to have these conversations is, of course, our ultimate goal is it leads to the next meeting that shares these creative options. Major gifts are gifts of wealth, not disposable income. To encourage these gifts, we need to have wealth conversations. How do we do this? How do we talk about wealth? More importantly, how do we get the donor to talk about their wealth? Let's look at some strategies from research. For some people, their wealth is a sensitive topic. How do we get people to open up about a sensitive topic? Research suggests two useful approaches. The first is to start social and then follow up. This says, I'm interested in your story. The second is to make questions part of another task. This says either I can help you or I need your help. Let's look at the first strategy first, and then we'll move to the second one. The first strategy is to start social, then follow up. Starting with simple social language often works best. Social, emotional language encourages sharing. Formal, legal, contract, transactional language discourages sharing. Social phrasing also tends to elicit more information. Researchers tested different methods of asking sensitive questions. They found that people are more forthcoming when you ask questions in a casual way rather than in a buttoned up official tone. A social conversation about the donor's wealth can start really simple. How's business? How's the market been treating you? The magic actually comes from the follow-up questions. These show that we care. We care about the things that the other person cares about. Most wealthy people care about their wealth. They care about their businesses or investments. Showing a shared interest through follow-up questions helps build relationships. It can also reveal opportunities where the fundraiser's expertise provides value. Assets have stories. Questions can lead the donor through their asset story. The asset story progresses through past, it's the origins of the asset, present, what's happening now, and future plans for the asset. This progression helps the donor to talk about their assets, but it also leads to fundraising conversations. Suppose the future plan is to sell. Giving before the sale can create tax and even income benefits. Suppose the future plan is never to sell. Charitable estate planning then becomes key. A sequence of questions might include something like this. For the past, what's the story of your business? How did you get started? For the present, what are you proudest of? What are you most excited about at the current time? And then, of course, the punchline for charitable planning is always the future. What are your future plans for your business? Maybe that's going to be a future sale or a transition. What will that mean to you? Have you ever thought about using the sale or transition of your business as an opportunity to achieve some of your charitable goals in addition to financial goals? Or maybe they're not going to sell. Well, then we're talking about a future estate transfer. Will your heirs continue running the business? I know there are some smart ways to avoid taxes for people like you who want to include a gift to charity in their plans. Have you ever considered that? Of course, the asset need not be a business. For example, the conversation might begin, are you a collector? Art, stamps, coins, etc. What's the story? How did you get started? Or do you invest in real estate? How did you get started? Where do you vacation? Do you own a home there? Or how's the market been treating you? What's your investment philosophy? What's the best investment you ever made? Tell me that story. The questions advance the story from the asset's past to its present to its future. The punchline for fundraising is the future. The future conversation can lead to questions about giving. This might include, have you ever considered making gifts with assets instead of cash? Or most donors giving at your level use appreciated assets instead of cash because they get a double tax benefit. Have you ever considered giving in that way? In Socratic fundraising, we actually oftentimes want to know the why. We want to uncover connections to the donor's people, their values, and their life story between the donor and the cause or the organization. But in the wealth conversation, oftentimes we instead want to know the how. For example, we might ask, you've done so much for this organization. What allows you to be so generous? Dan Rice explains, usually we stop at asking the donor what motivated them to make the gift. We want to ask a very different question. How were you able to make this wonderful gift? Such conversations can transition to a discussion of wealth and assets. For example, Jay Steenhuisen suggests, first, what makes it possible for you to make this generous cash gift? Second, have you ever given something other than cash to a charitable organization? And then it can lead to things like, are you planning to sell anything this year that is worth more than you paid for it? We can also use reverse questions. Another Socratic opening doesn't start with a question. It starts with a statement that triggers a question. For example, a common social question is, what do you do? Well, we can give an unusual answer. This one I just straight up stole from Brian because I think it's great, which is, I help people give weird assets to, well, to your organization, right? Or you can just say, I help donors give smarter. Those are statements that trigger a question. If you tell people, I help people give weird assets to your organization, they're going to respond with, what's the weirdest asset someone has given? If you say, I help donors give smarter, that tends to trigger a question. How do you do that? How do you help donors give smarter? The reason this is key is that it gives permission for us to share a story. Now, in that story, our advice is going to help someone. It's going to help someone like the donor. That person benefits because they gave an asset instead of cash. The story establishes our credibility as a guiding sage. The story ends with a question about the donor's wealth. For example, after sharing that story, maybe it's a story about a weird asset. We might end with, have you ever made any unusual investments? Or maybe we shared a story about how we help donors give smarter, and it's a story about them giving appreciated assets rather than cash. And we end it with, have you ever been hit with capital gains taxes? These questions open the wealth conversation, but that conversation needs to continue through the follow-up questions. There are many ways to start a wealth conversation, but the real power comes from the follow-up questions. As the conversation continues, planning opportunities often emerge. For example, if you ask, have you ever made any unusual investments? The person says yes, what do? Ask about it. Has it gone up in value? Capital gains taxes for collectibles are crazy high. This makes charitable options even more attractive. If the answer is no, ask about it. Oh, so do you like stocks or bonds, something else? Or for example, let's suppose you end your story with, have you ever been hit with capital gains taxes? If the donor says yes, ask about it. Oh, that must mean you were good at investing. Tell me what happened. If they say no, ask about it. Oh, that's smart. It's good to avoid those as long as you can. Do you think that might be a problem in the future? Notice that in these conversations, a person can also signal they don't own any appreciated assets. That's useful information. Wealth is held in appreciated assets. It's almost never held in cash. It's almost never just held in checking accounts. Usually, those without appreciated assets aren't wealth holders. They aren't likely to be major gift prospects, and learning this is helpful. We have many paths, but one destination. The conversation can take many directions, but the goal is to spot opportunities. Well, we should know by now, appreciated assets are ideal. Also, income goals can be important. Estate planning concerns create opportunities. Tax issues, those are perfect openings. All of these can emerge from the follow-up questions. They can all lead to the exact same destination, asking for the meeting to share some options. For example, we might say, this reminds me of another donor's situation. I remember he used some creative planning that avoided taxes, created income, provided for family, and made a big impact at the charity. Would you mind if I talk to some of our experts and put together a few ideas for you to look at? Another approach is to make questions part of another task. Sometimes we can be blunt. As an estate planning attorney, when I was in practice, I asked blunt questions to clients. What real estate do you own? Who's on the title? What's it worth? Stocks, bonds, bank accounts, any children? Any by a prior marriage? These questions weren't clever. They weren't social or story-fied, yet people still answered them. Frankly, if even a close friend asked the exact same questions, it probably wouldn't have a good outcome. But in that case, it worked. Why? Because we were there to get a job done. The questions were secondary to the task. Making questions secondary to a task works. It works especially well for sensitive information. This was one kind of funny experiment, but it showed how important it is to have some other reason to be asking your questions. So in this experiment, some people were asked directly, have you ever done this behavior? Others were instead given two sets of options. If you have ever done this behavior, how unethical do you think it was? Answers 1 through 5. Or if you have never done this behavior, how unethical do you think it was? Answers 6 and 7. Notice that there was a task in this second version. The task was collecting opinions about ethics. Admitting the behavior, that was just secondary to the task. Well, in this secondary approach, people were almost twice as likely to admit making a false insurance claim, cheating on a tax return, or lying about income. Now, in fundraising, we aren't trying to get people to admit improper acts, but we may want them to tell us about their assets. And for some, that's also sensitive information. But we can also make these issues secondary to another task. That task may relate to a philanthropic barrier. These conversations can start with a question like, what's holding you back from reaching your charitable goals? Of course, financial solutions might vary. They might include a multi-year pledge, an estate gift, or a complex trust. But first, we want to get agreement on the task. This might come from a question like, what if it was what if it was possible for you to make a gift and still accomplish your financial goals? Would you mind if I shared some options with you? Other tasks can also start such conversations. The first goal is still to get agreement on a task. For example, you mentioned that you're going to be passing the business on to your kids, or maybe selling your practice. Would you be interested in charitable options that may save you money on your transaction? Or you've been so generous to this cause in the past, would you be interested in learning about how to give more at a lower cost by using the best assets for the gift? Here's the great thing. After you get agreement on that task, things completely change. Now you can be super blunt with your questions. We can be very straightforward. How do you give? Through a company, private foundation? Do you normally give appreciated assets? How's your business structure? Is it difficult to get profits out due to tax concerns? Do you have any life insurance policies you no longer need? We can ask bluntly about the past, present, and future of every asset. The fundraiser then becomes a helpful advisor for an important task. Information sharing then comes naturally. There's, of course, other approaches. Another approach asks for reactions to a menu of asset giving options. In conversation, this might sound like the following. I help donors give smarter. Usually this involves gifts of stocks, real estate, businesses, life insurance, or retirement accounts. The tax benefits can be much larger. Have you ever considered giving something other than cash? Or what's your favorite form of giving? Have you ever considered other types of gifts like, and then we do the same laundry list. What options would you be interested in knowing more about? Now, we can do this in conversation, but it doesn't have to be in conversation. A survey, response card, or website might do the same. Donors could check or click to receive information. For example, how to save taxes with gifts of stocks or bonds, top tax tips for gifts of real estate, tax smart giving from a retirement account, giving smarter with closely held businesses, how to avoid estate taxes with charitable planning. Requesting the information, checking that box, notice it reveals the assets. It also creates opportunities for further conversations with that donor. We can ask donor opinions in person or in a survey. First, we often want to justify the questions. How do we do that? Well, maybe we need help with a problem. For example, we've noticed that other charities receive more of their gifts from stocks, bonds, and real estate. We're trying to figure out why. Or we've recently seen a drop in people saying that they've included us in their will documents, and we're trying to figure out why. After the justification, we just need to ask for permission. Would you mind if I ask a few questions about your thoughts on this? And then, well, then we ask for opinions. What's the likelihood you would ever consider making a gift of stocks or bonds, a gift of real estate, a gift in a will, a gift of cryptocurrency, artwork, or oil rights? Or maybe, what have you heard about the extra tax benefits from donating assets instead of cash? What about leaving estate gifts from an IRA or a 401k? We can also, in an extreme case, change the setting not only before we ask for the gift, we can change the setting after the gift decision. The right setting for major gifts is the land of wealth sharing. Sometimes we can establish that setting shortly before a gift. Sometimes we can establish it years before. But what if we're too late? Even then, there's still options. Chirian Koshi shared this story. He said, I had a donor on the phone. He said, I'm going to send you a check for $2,000 for a particular project. I said, Jim, is there any chance you have stock that's worth $2,000? He said, yes, absolutely, but I don't want to sell that stock. I said, take the cash, go buy that exact same stock, then send us the old shares worth $2,000. Now you have stepped up basis. That highly appreciated stock now starts at zero for capital gains tax purposes, and you get a charitable deduction as well. He asked, I can do that? I said, yeah. The next day, we received a stock gift, not of $2,000, but of $10,000 from the donor. Once we change the setting and we're no longer talking about a disposable income gift, we're talking about sharing wealth, those gifts get larger. Maybe the donor mentions he has included a gift in a will. Johnny Hayes suggests this question. If you plan to leave something to charity in your estate plan, could I share with you a way to make sure the best assets are used for the gift to minimize the loss in taxes? Or maybe a donor has already made a pledge. Appreciated assets are an ideal way to fulfill it. By the way, we want the donor to give that way because now the donor begins to think of their wealth as donation relevant, not just their disposable income. This conversation can even be scheduled right after the commitment. For example, one fundraiser uses this phrase, I can't thank you enough for this tremendous commitment to our charity. When I come back to finalize the details of how you want to allocate the gift, I'll bring a colleague who specializes in putting together gifts to maximize the tax benefits for you. It's easy to understand the idea. We want donors to make gifts of wealth, not disposable income. This is powerful. It changes the setting. It's also powerful because it changes the reference points. We're no longer referencing the small point of disposable income. We're referencing the big point of wealth sharing, and that transforms giving. But actually doing it, that can be daunting. Chirian Koshi explained this when he described his story. You intervene in the process and actually stop and say, no, I don't want your cash. At least they can feel that way. He says, I know that's scary, folks. I get it, but this is what you need to do. What this really means is being the donor's helper in the conversation. The gift or pledge was already secured, and we interrupt that process. That's not what salespeople do. And that's the point. We reject the cash to help the donor. We take on more administrative hassle to help the donor. We provide guidance, wisdom, and counsel. We serve as the donor's guiding sage. We advance the donor's hero story. We guide them in a journey, but it's a journey that's set in the right setting. It's a journey that's set in the land of wealth sharing. So that's a bit about some wealth scripts. In our last few minutes, I want to share a little bit about some research as to why it is so powerful to change our conversations into these conversations about wealth, not disposable income. So the real secret to these really big gifts, major gifts, are gifts of wealth, not disposable income. First thing to keep in mind, wealth is not income. So I was just at a conference where somebody was talking about cryptocurrency donations. I know this is Brian Klontz's favorite topic, and he said people that give cryptocurrency, they're wealthy. And then he said because they have an average income that was higher than normal. Like, it's not the same thing. You can have a really big income and have negative net worth. Okay. Two different animals. Wealth actually doesn't come from a paycheck. Let me be straightforward. Wealth comes from owning assets that go up in value. So the idea is this: wealth is appreciated assets. We buy assets with inheritance, borrowings, or savings from income. How does it go up? Well, we either pick the right assets, that usually involves a risk, or we use personal effort to increase the asset value. This is how wealth is built. How did Bill Gates build wealth? Well, he used personal effort to build a company. How did Warren Buffett build wealth? Well, he came up with a new way to borrow money to buy stocks, and then he picked the right stocks. How does the average American build wealth? They borrow money, call it a mortgage, to buy an asset, call it a home, that goes up in value, right? That's how it works. Wealth is actually a different money category. The story of wealth is the story of appreciated assets. Depending on how we count it, less than 3% of household wealth is held in cash or checking accounts. Now, this is important psychologically because when we're asking for cash, we're asking from the small bucket. If we're instead asking for appreciated assets, now we're asking from the big bucket. Large gifts are made possible by large reference points. Here is a fun experiment. People were walking into a grocery store, asked if they wanted to participate in an experiment. They get a candy bar if they said yes. They were randomly assigned to be asked one of two sets of questions: either what's in your wallet or purse? Do you have any cash? Do you have any credit cards? Or do you own stocks, bonds, certificates of deposit? Well, it turns out just being asked that question changed people's behavior. Those asked about their wealth, well, they spent 36% more in their subsequent shopping trip on average. Money categories change behavior. And this is particularly true when it comes to charitable giving. A small ask from a small category, that can work, right? That's just pennies a day. It's an inconsequential decision. But a big ask from a small category does not work. If you want to make a big ask, you need to make that ask from a big category. A gift description can change the reference points. So in one experiment, a monthly pledge was described as either so much per day or so much a year. With the daily amount, that's the small reference point, people compared the gift with routinely encountered petty cash type of expenditures. But with the annual amount, people compared with infrequently encountered major expenditures. So it turns out that even at this very small level, big gifts need big reference points. So the question was it better to describe a pledge commitment as being $1 a day, $4, $7 a day, or as $350 a year, $1,400, $2,500 a year? It turns out for the smallest ask, the daily amount worked better. But for anything over $1,000, that result reversed. So yes, you can ask for the pennies a day story, and that works. It works for pennies. It does not work for big gifts. Another experiment showed that small reference point actually makes future giving small too. In this case, people had a gift made on their behalf, either as a single lump sum or broken into small daily amounts. Later, people with prior gifting broken into small amounts actually gave a third less because their reference point was smaller. There was actually a way to fix it. Because the reason that people with prior gifting on their behalf broken into small amounts gave less was because the reference point felt smaller. So the solution was to show them the total of the prior gifts before making the ask. Doing this actually increased donations by almost 50%. Notice what we're doing. We're making a bigger reference point. We see this again and again in experimental research. When, for example, prior gifts were described in total terms, people gave more. It's a bigger reference point. If they're described in monthly terms, people gave less. Describing past giving as several small gifts is one story. Describing it as a single large gift is a different story. If we change the story, it changes the behavior because we're changing the reference points. So for example, if you come up to a donor and you say, you have given to us for 6 years now, and your giving has averaged $20 a month, and I want to see if you might consider this gift of $1,000. Okay, that seems, well, that's not the kind of person I am. I don't make gifts like this. But if instead you say, you have given to us for 5 years now, believe it or not, you've given us in that period of time, you've given us over $2,000. So wonder if you might consider this project. It's about $1,000 gift. Notice now we've changed how we describe the reference point, and it makes the gift seem more reasonable. In one experiment, this tested 6 different mailings, 6 different headlines among 50,000 donors. It found that the best performing headline for the donation request was campaign donor for X years. Your most generous gift was X dollars. Thank you. Notice that this begins with emphasizing their largest gift. That's now the reference point, and the long relationship. Now, when we come to referencing big reference points, this is why a $10,000 check is not as valuable as a $10,000 gift of stock shares. Now, I get it. The stock shares may be more hassle for the nonprofit, but it costs the donor less. But what's more important is that if we get that gift from assets, it is coming from the large category. If we get it from the disposable income category, it's a tiny category. Future gifting tends to stay tiny. Appreciated assets is where wealth lives. That is psychologically why we want to have these wealth conversations. Look, in math, a dollar is a dollar. But in story, people put labels on money, and they treat the dollars differently based upon those labels. When a new category of money becomes donation relevant, giving increases substantially. Look, you can think of it this way. The first time that you ever you were moving, you had extra household items, you left it to a charity shop. From that point forward, whenever you have those extra items again, what comes to mind? Charity comes to mind, because that asset class has been made donation relevant. Well, of course, we see this in massive national data. One analysis looking at over 1 million nonprofit tax returns showed that organizations that include gifts, not just of cash, but include gifts of non-cash assets, grow their fundraising dramatically faster. Actually at more than double the rate if they start out that way, and at more than 6 times the rate if they do that consistently. So we do want to have these conversations because mindset matters. Let me end with 2 quick charts, and then I'll turn it back over to Brian. One, hey, we already know that legacy gifts can be transformational for the organization, because this is how wealthy people like to give, and those gifts can be massive. But it's also important to keep in mind that those gifts can be transformational for the donor, because for most people, the first time that they will ever commit to a gift from their wealth, not their disposable income, is when they commit to that gift in their estate plan. And notice what happens after people do that. Current giving spikes about 77% on average, and that is sustained 2 years later, 4, 6, even 8 years later. The reference points have changed. Well, that's a bit about how to have wealth conversations and inspire major gifts of assets. If you're interested in this sort of thing, I share all my stuff for free. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I'll send you free links to all of my slides, videos, presentations, books, all those sorts of things. So I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Brian at this point. And you're muted, Brian. Still muted. There you go.
Unmuted. I think I'm unmuted on my phone. Now I'm muted here. Bottom line, thank you. This was fantastic. It's got the science, but most importantly, I like the sentences, and that people don't have to say it's kind of like this is something you would say. It's like, this is the sentence. So don't reinvent things. So I really appreciate that. Again, this will be available on our website later this week, the full video. So if there are certain sections that you'd like to obviously go back, replay, write down, integrate into your practice, and with your donors, obviously that's the whole point. So thank you very, very much. And we'll be able to have this posted later this week, and look forward to our next month's webinar. Thanks, Dr. James.